Yeah, we're recording it now. So this is a chart uh, which one of us has brought out for discussion today. So just would you like to give some background to the chart? Is there some background or some context to this person?
So the context is this person has started his life from humble beginnings,
Mhm.
and he's a hard worker, and he's very famous in his line of field.
Okay. And what are we aiming to kind of do as a reading?
Yeah. So let's look at what the chart is showing us. Uh, let's do a normal chart reading to see what the context of the chart is telling us. I can give in the details at the end, but we can see what the chart is telling us, uh, and what are the things that are kind of deceiving, and how his life turned out, and how it matches with the dasha sequence and everything.
Okay, so let me just start off and then we'll sort of go with the flow in that sense. So, obviously, the first thing that viewers will notice is the concentration of planets in the 12th house, which is here and here, including the Lagna Lord in the 12th house. There's also along with the 12th Lord, and there's also the 10th lord in the 12th house. And then there's the Rahu Ketu axis in 1-7, which probably suggests to me that this person may have to do something with either foreign lands or isolated places or hospitals or spiritual places. So I'll take a pause here.
Yeah. So my eyes are also drawn towards the 12th house, and we can see the combination of more than four planets in the 12th house, including the 10th house lord. So it forms a form of ascetic yoga called Pravraja yoga, and it is happening in the 12th house, which is a spiritual house. So that's what I would also guess at the first uh, look, but we have to see the whole context of the chart and see, uh, especially we have to look at the 159 houses to see if the context of the chart is in line with the yoga that we are seeing. But the 12th house is drawing my attention to.
Yeah. In fact, for me, the first thing I look for is what is the basic core strength of the chart in terms of the Lagna and the Lagna Lord. So the and the moment you see a Lagna Lord going to a 6-8-12, it just raises a bit of a concern. So Moon, being the Lagna Lord, goes to the 12th house. Uh, the second thing I look for is there any strength to the Lagna or the Lagna Lord? So here, the dispositor of Moon is Mercury, which is Swarashi. It's not in a Kendra or a Trikona where we would like it to be to qualify for a classical Parvata Yoga. But yeah, we can't write off this Mercury because this Mercury is got strength in core strength, raw strength of retrogression, and the fact that it's Swarashi. So there is some utilization. There is some ability by this person to kind of navigate through the ups and downs of life. So the Lagna Lord getting strengthened is a good idea. Rahu Ketu specifically in the Lagna kind of is another marker to say Ketu kind of brings about a very different kind of flavor to the personality of the person. Uh, Ketu is the shy one. Ketu is the one who kind of, has got smoke and fog. So it kind of holds back the personality. There could be that element to that person. And like I think, you said about spirituality. So Ketu kind of adds to that piece of being the moksha karaka, bringing that angle of some spiritual orientation to the lagna itself. So that's my first catch. Just adding on to the 12th house stellium that is there. Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at yogas, guys. How many yogas in this chart? How many of those are how many Raj yogas and Dhan yogas? Because that would really begin to tell us what the level of the chart is, how strong the chart is in terms of uh, the dasha sequences that eventually play out.
Exactly. So the first thing that comes to my mind is eighth lord in the eighth house and the 12th lord in the 12th house with afflictions. So that forms Viprit Raj Yoga. But indeed, it does have influence of other house lords. But if we just consider Saturn in the eighth house by itself, I think it forms uh, Viprit Raj Yoga, one kind of Viprit Raj Yoga.
Yeah, and I would just begin also by looking at the underlying sources of strength for planets. So in the D1 chart, obviously we discussed Mercury being Swarashi. Saturn is also in its own sign. Venus is in its own sign. So that's three planets. Then in D9, Jupiter is exalted and Mars is in its own sign. And if you were to take Rahu Ketu's position in D9 as Rahu being in its Mul Trikona sign in Gemini, then Rahu also becomes strong. So there are quite a few planets here which have sources of strength. Just to answer that question of then how do they combine to give yoga effects? And obviously, while we are discussing yogas, we also need to look at some of the challenging yogas in the sense this is an arista in that sense because Lagna Lord goes to the 12th under the influence of malefics. And then the first house is also under the Rahu Ketu axis.
Yeah, picking up on the Lagna, the other thing which we need to notice is the fact that the moon is dark, right? This moon is very dark. It's more or less meeting sun, so it's like it does get that dark orientation. Ketu in the Lagna kind of gives another angle to it. There is Parvata Yoga, but yeah, there is that, Mars and Sun onto the moon, not the best of influences. But what you said is about planetary strength. So in the miscellaneous Raj Yogas, defined by Parashara, he gives out one which says, if there are three or more planets which are Swarashi or exalted, that itself is a Raj Yoga. So this one does qualify for that.
And sorry, yeah, Sandeep, just one more point. Look at even though Mercury is strong, Mercury and Sun, the degrees are very close. In fact, they are less than 1 degree. So one can argue it's the Kazimi effect that might happen, which is when a planet is technically less than 1 degrees from the sun. So the planet doesn't, in terms of giving the results of the yogas, is not weak. It actually becomes strong. Even though the natural significations of Mercury might still be combust.
Yeah, that's a good
Exactly.
point. That's a good point.
Right. So, and just to expand on the Avayoga that Bulak mentioned, you can see that it can be, we have to see that if there is any cancellation as well. So here we don't have any planets in angles or any benefics in angles, especially. And then also we don't have any malefics in 3, 6, or 11. So adding to the combination of Lagna Lord in the 12th with the afflictions.
Visu, would you consider Jupiter being in an angle from Moon as some sort of modifying factor?
Uh, Not really. So we are just looking at from the Lagna Lord perspective for the Avayoga, right? So the angle in the planets in angle from the moon. So usually we consider that, or the planet in angle from Lagna, we consider that for the cancellation of Kemadruma Yoga, which is with respect to moon.
Okay.
Okay, so what are the good positive yogas? What is the good life for this guy? Is there a good life? Are there any combinations? So we can start off simply by the moon and Jupiter being 410 or Kendra to each other. So that's a Kesari yoga by itself there. But let's look at the big Raj yogas and the big Dhan yogas first, which are the big guys, the the 5, 9, 10, 4, 1 kind of combinations.
So the thing that I see very strong in terms of Dhan Yoga is the 11th Lord in the 11th house, which is very strong, aspected by the 9th Lord Jupiter. So it increases the Dana Yoga given by the Venus in the 11th house.
Yeah. And also, it's a very strong yoga karaka Mars, right? So
Yeah.
there's a 110, 1-5 sort of Raj yoga also playing out.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there is the 110, which is the combination of the Lagna Lord and Mars, who's the 10th Lord in the 12th house. And then there is the Moon and Mars again, which is the 1-5, right? Getting formed again in the 12th house, which is the Moon is the Lagna Lord and Mars is the 5th Lord. You have the Kesari Yoga. You also have Buddhaditya because it does involve the Lagna Lord. So there is the Buddhaditya, there is the 110, and it involves the moon. So this moon is in fact stacking up in a lot of yogas, right? So it becomes quite an interesting period for moon. While it's dark, there is a abhiyoga kind of situation, and it's also configured in multiple Raj yogas. Buddhaditya, Kesari, 1-5, 110, all the major Raj yogas. Moon seems to be the pivotal planet, it seems.
It's
Right.
also interesting that both from the Lagna and the Chandra Lagna, the 12th Lord is in its own house. It's I just noticed that because from Chandra Lagna also Venus becomes the 12th Lord in its own house.
Yeah, in fact, would you guys like to comment on this thing about, in this chart has it 8th Lord in the 8th house? So 12th Lord in the 12th house, and these are Trik Lords, right? So what is the meaning of that? How do you think that, what does that mean? So is it good? Is it not great? What could it mean?
So based on my limited experience, the for the three clots, best position for them to be in its own house so that it doesn't afflict any other house. Right. So if the eighth lord, suppose let's say it is in the 10th house, then it would afflict the house
Yeah.
by its lordship. If it sits in its own house, then it would bring out the good qualities of that house too. So I would say for the three clouds, the best position for them to be is in their own house.
So here, for example, I think, the underlying principle you're using is that the Lord, when it occupies its own house, kind of, protects that house or gives or enhances the good of that house because he's comfortable, he's sitting in his own house. And since it's a Trik Lord, which is the 6, 8, 12, uh, 8th Lord being in the 8th, we kind of, what would be some of the things we can say? I mean, not necessarily for this chart, but what are some of the possible good of the 8th that could possibly come through because of such a placement? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I would like to sort of tie it to the dasha sequence as well, in the sense that this person would have been born in Jupiter, and then somewhere in the mid teens, at the age of 15, he would have started Saturn. Now, Saturn, running Saturn as the eighth lord in the eighth house, and Saturn also becomes the eighth lord from the Chandra Lagna. I'm guessing it would have resulted in some mystical, spiritual experience, if I can put it like that.
So this is beautiful. This is like, Shani Dasha, right? And the most dreaded Shani Dasha, and it's in the eighth house, and it's the eighth lord from the Chandra Lagna. So someone could really be duped in this case, right? Someone out there, some astrologers out there could really make killing out of this placement. But my question is it really going to be a bad dasha? Is it going to be that dasha which is, going to bring diseases, illness, chronic troubles, scandals, litigation? Because those are some of the eighth house things, right? And Saturn is in the eighth house, and it's his dasha. Or like, he said was that it protects the house. So does it manifest the positive of the house, which means he doesn't actually have all of that, and he possibly does yeah, sure, there'll be some changes, because that's changes in transformation, but they could be positive. uh, would health be fine, or would health be impacted? Stuff like that. That's the area where a lot of people get scared, and people want to figure out, hey, listen, what's going to happen in my life? So if so if you have some information about this guy's Saturn Dasha, how it really played out, do you have any information?
Yeah, I think so. What I was about to say in terms of the eighth house is it is also a research-oriented house, and it also brings innovation, out-of-box thinking. And I don't have the exact timelines for this individual, but I think the Saturn Mahadasha is the turning point in his life.
Yeah,
It
it runs
started
from the age
to
of 15 to almost 35, right? So that's like
so
his school, college, and work. I mean, that whole period is he's going to start work and be in the middle of his, he's going to be 35 by the time it ends, and it's 15 when it starts.
yeah, based on his life events, 1960s is the period, is the turning point in his life.
And when you say turning point, you have any other points of reference in terms of uh, anything that happened?
Uh, then I have to reveal the name.
No,
So do
so
you?
just before
Okay.
that,
So we'll
we
reveal the
just,
name later. We'll go to the
yeah,
name later. Yeah.
just before
Fine. So
that,
there's the turning point. Saturn Dasha. So necessarily, viewers, the point is this Saturn Dasha, which is the eighth lord in the eighth house, retrograde, right? So people will say a Vakri Saturn and Shani Dasha, eighth lord, but it's not bad. It's not bad because Saturn is in its own house, so he's protecting the person from the ill effects of the eighth house, and possibly bringing research, innovation, maybe occult, maybe guy goes deep into studies or something. So that's the part which plays out, and that's
yeah,
really important to note.
I just have one small point to add as an additional consideration that agreed Saturn in the eighth house as the eighth lord will make the significations of the eighth house strong, but it still aspects the 10th house and the fifth house from there. And given that this person was in his education and early career stage when Saturn was running, and the fact that the fifth lord goes to the 12th, uh, and Mars is also the 10th lord, right? So it could have resulted in some instability in either education or career in that sense.
Well, I think if you have some information, it's fine, or otherwise, when we get the name, we can go into details. Saturn, yeah, Pulak, you're right. Saturn afflicting the 10th, surely Saturn afflicts it as a malefic. Saturn afflicting the 5th as a malefic, yeah, absolutely. Can bring about delays, troubles, all of that stuff. The 5th Lord going to the 12th, yeah, could also be education abroad, because the Karaka for education is well placed. Mercury, Swarashi, Jupiter is fair and fine. 5th Lord, 5th house is aspected by a Swarashi Venus. So I mean, educationally seems fine. And I think right in the beginning of the video, this guy's a PhD or something. No,
No,
I
no.
got that wrong.
No, that was some other chart.
Ah, okay. So lots of possibilities there. Fine. So
Right.
that sorts out the, trick lord in the trick house.
Yeah, and
Pivotal turning point for this guy in his life is the Saturn.
yeah, VV, just building on that research and innovation piece, it's
Mhm.
interesting because Saturn goes to the ninth house as the eighth lord in its own sign from Chandra Lagna.
Correct.
So he could be involved in some research based stuff, right? I mean, in that sense.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly. So let me reveal the name, and then we can discuss more freely. Right? Is it okay if I reveal the name now?
yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So this is the chart of Giorgio Armani, the fashion designer. You know Armani, right? Armani suits.
Yeah, the Armani.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Armani. So it's because he's a billionaire, and he's a self-made person, and his turning point happened in the Saturn. As you guys were talking about education, I just looked at Wikipedia. He was aspiring for a career in medical, and he even joined the medical school. But then after 3 years, he dropped out, and then he went on to join the army. Then after that, he decided to pursue the career in fashion.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. What would explain a career in fashion, if I can ask both
So,
of you?
so I would say for the career in fashion, how the Venus placement is, right? And then I would look at uh, the sixth house or the 12th house. I'm not sure about 100% sure about this. I'm just using my logic here. So to see whether the 6-12 axis or the sixth and the 12th axis gives imagination, a lot of imagination and those kind of things.
The way to look at it would be which are the houses of creativity and skills and crafts. So that's Mercury, that's Mars, the Lagna Lord, and the 10th Lord all together. Yeah, so we see the second house, by the way, is also clothing. Second house is clothing, second house is accessories, sometimes jewelry, jewels, gems, all of that stuff. Classically, Taurus owned by Venus, Kalpurush Kundli. So the second house, Taurus, kind of represents a lot of that stuff. So the second house carries that residual meaning to it. Then you have the lords of creativity, fifth house. Third house, skills and crafts. So all of that. Second lord, sun, representing possibly that whole domain of either, I mean, this could have been mouth, this could have been food, this could be something of that nature as well. And then you have the strong Venus itself, right? The Venus itself is pretty strong. It doesn't directly impact any of the key planets in terms of profession. So I'd say that whole second lord, third lord, fifth lord, 10th lord, and Lagna lord, all of
Yeah.
them are coming together.
So
It
two or
doesn't
three,
directly give away fashion as such. I agree on that.
yeah, 2 or 3 points from my side. Sandeep, I agree with you that there's a third and fifth house connection with the 10th lord, right? So let's just take it step by step. This
And the Lagna lord.
person wanted to do something in medicine. That's what you said, Vivi. And obviously, that concentration of planets in the 12th house aspecting the sixth, I'm guessing, has something to do with it. And then, interestingly, you mentioned the armed forces, right? The military. And Saturn is in the nakshatra of Mars. Um, and Mars also goes to the Lagna from Chandra Lagna. So obviously, that is a point to consider. The thing about Venus, I was just thinking, from Dasha Lagna, Venus becomes the Yoga Karaka as the 10th Lord and 5th Lord. And it's strong in its own house in the 5th house. if that makes sense.
Yeah, so this guy has, which means we can say he has the creative potential. The D1 kind of indicates that. The Dasha period is always important because these are long periods, strong planetary influences kind of tend to move you in certain directions, right? So from the Dasha Lagna, uh, it's interesting that if you see he is, this Venus is in the fourth house, which means it will aspect the 10th house from the Dasha Lagna. It's a Swarashi, strong Venus. So during Saturn, that whole, and that's the age when he's going to choose a profession. He's going to possibly make a decision to move in some direction. And possibly that's what takes him there.
Yeah, I think I made a mistake. I think Venus rules the fourth and the ninth house. My bad.
Yeah, fourth and ninth, but it does aspect the 10th house, right? A strong Venus who's fourth and ninth, which is a Yoga Karaka, influence on the 10th house during the Saturn Dasha. So that whole Venusian thing, 10th house from Saturn, possibly begins to play out much more in this time. But he's destined to follow a creative career. I mean, there has to be creativity in that career. There has to be, this whole third, fifth, fourth, 10th. I mean, this is a very strong combination indicating that. And from the Dasha Lagna, it's happening in the fifth house of creativity again. Would I have said he's a fashion designer straight out?
No,
Probably.
I would have probably, no, I think I would have definitely said high degree of possibility this person will relocate abroad. And I think that's what we covered as well. And I believe Armani relocated from Italy to the US as a part of his profession. And definitely 10th Lord in the 12th house will indicate a profession outside your native place. Plus the fact the Rahu Ketu axis is there in the 1-7. Uh, I that would have been the first thing that would have come to my mind, and possibly second thing, something to do with either spirituality or hospitals or something like that.
Yeah, and the one thing I think Sandeep mentioned in the beginning of the video, where we were talking about the planets in the 12th house and how Ketu is in the ascendant. Uh, I I couldn't find much of details, the personal life details for him in the Wikipedia, and it is mentioned that he's a very private man. He's
Which is the
very,
12th house as well, right?
yeah,
Privacy.
right. So yeah, this chart, when I pulled up this chart, this was really interesting. That's why I wanted to show this chart.
Yeah, it's an interesting chart. Um,
And he had some very strong opinions about how the fashion industry is, exploitative of women and how, they're almost. So, I mean, he always spoke about this thing about the sexual, the sex and the exploitation of women in the fashion industry. He kind of, a whole lot of news reports which talk about his being very open, vocal, and critical. So that's the Mercury, Moon, Sun in the 12th house of bed pleasures. It's the house of secrecy, behind the scenes, what happens.
yeah.
He's kind of bringing all of that out, possibly.
Yeah. And just one final point, and I think we can, unless there is something more to cover, maybe we can conclude this episode of the Jyotish Network video. Uh, the second lord goes to the 12th house. I don't know, Vivi, maybe Armani is a lot into philanthropy as well, or at least donating to charity.
Yeah, I was looking for that, but I couldn't find the detail as well. So the one thing that played out is the Saturn being strong in its own house in the eighth, and from the Chandra Lagna as well, it's the eighth lord in the ninth strong. He was very innovative in his fashions, and uh, he he had a big name for that in his field.
Sandeep, do you want to
Yeah,
just
you're right.
conclude it with the.
He's got a whole lot of stuff related to social responsibility, charity, and work causes. Giorgio Armani establishes Namesake Foundation. 20, he's like donating 2.2 million to hospitals in Milan, Rome, Bergamo, Versilla, and all that stuff. So there is definitely that whole philanthropy which is coming through. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys? Yeah, okay. I think this is great. Sandeep, Vivi, would you want to conclude this episode? I mean, the whole idea of doing
Yeah,
this, I mean, this was not
absolutely.
a planned episode just for the viewers. We just picked up the chart and just wanted to walk you through how we look at analyzing a chart in real time without having much background about the person. And as you can see, there are many possibilities when all so many planets combine together in terms of the life direction of the individual. But VV Sandeep, just if you guys could also conclude and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, from my side, what I would like to emphasize from this chart is uh, every chart has its own karma. So we cannot just come to any conclusion based on the first look. It has to happen in a very methodical format, and uh, we need to have a lot of knowledge in the field. I'm not saying that I have that knowledge. So we are just trying to say that from the surface, we can say a lot of negatives. But even if we look at the Avayoga, that's what I wanted to focus on, where his Lagna Lord goes to the 12th with no supporting planets in the angles or in the 3, 6, 11 houses. But he has had a very decent life in terms of health and with God's grace. So we have to respect that, and we have to be very humble when we read the chart, and we have to accept that it is not in our hands uh, to make a fate of a person, and we shouldn't scare anyone out so easily because we have that power.
That's very well put, Vivi. I couldn't have put it more uh, gracefully. Sandeep, if you could conclude, summarize for the viewers
Yeah, pretty
to
much.
help
Pretty
them
much.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much what you said and Vivi said. I pretty much go by that. Absolutely.
Okay. So I hope everybody took something positive and informative out of this. And we'll see you the next time soon. Thank you so much.